frustrate their own gains, for other people make fun of them and call them la grande nation. By way of specially illustrating this perverse and exuberant respect for other people's opinion, let me take passage from the Times of March 31, 1846, giving a detailed account of one Thomas Wicks, an apprentice who, from motives of vengeance, had murdered his master. Here we have very unusual circumstances in an extraordinary character, though one very suitable for our purpose, and these combine to give a striking picture of this folly, which is so deeply rooted in human nature, and allow us to form an accurate notion of the extent to which it will go. On the morning of the execution, says the report, the Rev. Or early in attendance upon him, but Wicks, a quiet demeanor, betrayed no interest in his ministrations, appearing to feel anxious only to acquit himself bravely before the spectators of his ignominious end. In the procession Wicks fell into his proper place with alacrity, and, as he entered the chapel yard, remarked, sufficiently loud to be heard by several persons near him, "Now, then, as Dr. Dodd said, I shall soon know the grand secret." On reaching the scaffold, the miserable wretch mounted the drop without the slightest assistance, and when he got to the center, he bowed to the spectators twice, a proceeding which called forth a tremendous cheer from the degraded crowd beneath. This is an admirable example of the way in which a man, with death in the most dreadful form before his very eyes, and eternity beyond it, will care for nothing but the impression he makes upon a crowd of gapers, and the opinion he leaves behind him in their heads. There was much the same kind of thing in the case of Lecomte, who was executed at Frankfurt, also in 1846, for an attempt on the king's life. At the trial he was very much annoyed that he was not allowed to appear, in decent attire, before the upper house, and on the day of the execution it was a special grief to him that he was not permitted to shave. It is not only in recent times that this kind of thing has been known to happen. Matteo Alemán tells us, in the introduction to his celebrated romance, Guzmán de Alférich, that many infatuated criminals, instead of devoting their last hours to the welfare of their souls, as they ought to have done, neglect this duty for the purpose of preparing and committing to memory a speech to be made from the scaffold. I take these extreme cases as being the best illustrations to what I mean, for they give us a magnified reflection of our own nature. The anxieties of all of us, our worries, vexations, bothers, troubles, uneasy apprehensions and strenuous efforts are due, in perhaps the large majority of instances, to what other people will say, and we are just as foolish in this respect as those miserable criminals. Envy and hatred are very often traceable to a similar source. Now, it is obvious that happiness, which consists for the most part in peace of mind and contentment, would be served by nothing so much as by reducing this impulse of human nature within reasonable limits, which would perhaps make it 1/50th part of what it is now. By doing so, we should get rid of a thorn in the flesh which is always causing us pain. But it is a very difficult task, because the impulse in question is a natural and innate perversity of human nature. Tacitus says, "The lust of fame is the last that a wise man shakes off." The only way of putting an end to this universal folly is to see clearly that it is a folly, and this may be done by recognizing the fact that most of the opinions in men's heads are apt to be false, perverse, erroneous, and absurd, and so in themselves unworthy of attention. Further, that other people's opinions can have very little real and positive influence upon us in most of the circumstances and affairs of life. Again, this opinion is generally of such an unfavorable character that it would worry a man to death to hear everything that was said of him, or the tone in which he was spoken of. And finally, among other things, we should be clear about the fact that honor itself has no really direct, but only an indirect, value. If people were generally converted from this universal folly, the result would be such an addition to our peace of mind and cheerfulness as at present seems inconceivable. People would present a firmer and more confident front to the world, and generally behave with less embarrassment and restraint. It is observable that a retired mode of life has an exceedingly beneficial influence on our peace of mind, and this is mainly because we thus escape having to live constantly in the sight of others, and pay everlasting regard to their casual opinions. In a word, we are able to return upon ourselves. At the same time a good deal of positive misfortune might be avoided, which we are now drawn into by striving after shadows, or, to speak more correctly, by indulging a mischievous piece of folly, and we should consequently have more attention to give to solid realities and enjoy them with less interruption than at present. But Greek, kolepagia kala, what is worth doing is hard to do. Section 2. Pride. The folly of our nature which we are discussing puts forth three: ambition, vanity, and pride. The difference between the last two is this: pride is an established conviction of one's own paramount worth in some particular respect, while vanity is the desire of rousing such a conviction in others, and it is generally accompanied by the secret hope of ultimately coming to the same conviction oneself. Pride works from within, it is the direct appreciation of oneself. Vanity is the desire to arrive at this appreciation from without. So we find that vain people are talkative, proud, and taciturn. But the vain person ought to be aware that the good opinion of others, which he strives for, may be obtained much more easily and certainly by persistent silence than by speech, even though he has very good things to say. Anyone who wishes to affect pride is not therefore a proud man, but he will soon have to drop his, as every other, assumed character. It is only a firm, unshakable conviction of preeminent worth and special value which makes a man proud in the true sense of the word, a conviction which may, no doubt, be a mistaken one or rest on advantages which are of an adventitious and conventional character. Still pride is not the less pride for all that, so long as it be present in real earnest. And since pride is thus rooted in conviction, it resembles every other form of knowledge in not being within our own arbitrament. Pride's worst foe, I mean its greatest obstacle, is vanity, which courts the applause of the world in order to gain the necessary foundation for a high opinion of one's own worth, whilst pride is based upon a pre-existing conviction of it. It is quite true that pride is something which is generally found fault with, and cried down, but usually, I imagine, by those who have nothing upon which they can pride themselves. In view of the impudence and foolhardiness of most people, anyone who possesses any kind of superiority or merit will do well to keep his eyes fixed on it, if he does not want it to be entirely forgotten. For if a man is good-natured enough to ignore his own privileges, and hobnob with the generality of other people, as if he were quite on their level, they will be sure to treat him, frankly and candidly, as one of themselves. This is a piece of advice I would specially offer to those whose superiority is of the highest kind, real superiority, I mean, of a purely personal nature which cannot, like orders and titles, appeal to the eye or ear at every moment, as, otherwise, they will find that familiarity breeds contempt, or, as the Romans used to say, sus minervam. Joke with a slave, and he'll soon show his heels, is an excellent Arabian proverb, nor ought we to despise what Horace says, sum superbium quaesitum meritus. Usurp the fame you have deserved. No doubt, when modesty was made a virtue, it was a very advantageous thing for the fools, for everybody is expected to speak of himself as if he were one. This is leveling down indeed, for it comes to look as if there were nothing but fools in the world. The cheapest sort of pride is national pride, for if a man is proud of his own nation, it argues that he has no qualities of his own of which he can be proud, otherwise he would not have recourse to those which he shares with so many millions of his fellow men. The man who is endowed with important personal qualities will be only too ready to see clearly in what respects his own nation falls short, since their failings will be constantly before his eyes. But every miserable fool who has nothing at all of which he can be proud adopts, as a last resource, pride in the nation to which he belongs. He is ready and glad to defend all its faults and follies tooth and nail, thus reimbursing himself for his own inferiority. For example, if you speak of the stupid and degrading bigotry of the English nation with the contempt it deserves, you will hardly find one Englishman in 50 to agree with you, but if there should be one, he will generally happen to be an intelligent man. The Germans have no national pride, which shows how honest they are, as everybody knows. And how dishonest are those who, by a piece of ridiculous affectation, pretend that they are proud of their country, the Deutsche Brüder and the demagogues who flatter the mob in order to mislead it. I have heard it said that gunpowder was invented by a German. I doubt it. Lichtenberg asks, is it that a man who is not a German does not care about pretending that he is one, and that if he makes any pretense at all, it is to be a Frenchman or an Englishman? However that may be, individuality is a far more important thing than nationality, and in any given man deserves 1,000-fold more consideration. And since you cannot speak of national character without referring to large masses of people, it is impossible to be loud in your praises and at the same time honest. National character is only another name for the particular form which the littleness, perversity, and baseness of mankind take in every country. If we become disgusted with one, we praise another, until we get disgusted this too. Every nation mocks at other nations, and all are right. The contents of this chapter, which treats, as I have said, of what we represent in the world, or what we are in the eyes of others, may be further distributed under 3 heads: honor, rank and fame. Section 3. Rank. Let us take rank first, as it may be dismissed in a few words, although it plays an important part in the eyes of the masses and of the Philistines, and is a most useful wheel in the machinery of the state. It has a purely conventional value. Strictly speaking, it is a sham, its method is to exact an artificial respect, and, as a matter of fact, the whole thing is a mere farce. Orders, it may be said, are bills of exchange drafted on public opinion, and the measure of their value is the credit of the drawer. Of course, as a substitute for pensions, they save the state a good deal of money, and besides, they serve a very useful purpose, if they are distributed with discrimination and judgment. For people in general have eyes and ears, it is true, but not much else, very little judgment indeed, or even memory. There are many services of the state quite beyond the range of their understanding, others, again, are appreciated and made much of for a time, and then soon forgotten. It seems to me, therefore, very proper, that a cross or a star should proclaim to the mass of people always and everywhere, this man is not like you, he has done something. But orders lose their value when they are distributed unjustly, or without due selection, or in too great numbers. A prince should be as careful in conferring them as a man of business is in signing a bill. It is a pleonasm to inscribe on any order for distinguished service, for every order ought to be for distinguished service. That stands to reason. Section 4. Honor. Honor is a much larger question than rank, and more difficult to discuss. Let us begin by trying to define it. If I were to say honor is external conscience, and conscience is inward honor, no doubt a good many people would assent, but there would be more show than reality about such a definition, and it would hardly go to the root of the matter. I prefer to say, honor is, on its objective side, other people's opinion of what we are worth; on its subjective side, it is the respect we pay to this opinion. From the latter point of view, to be a man of honor is to exercise what is often a very wholesome, but by no means a purely moral, influence. The feelings of honor and shame exist in every man who is not utterly depraved, and honor is everywhere recognized as something particularly valuable. The reason of this is as follows. By and in himself a man can accomplish very little, he is like Robinson Crusoe on a desert island. It is only in society that a man's powers can be called into full activity. He very soon finds this out when his consciousness begins to develop, and there arises in him the desire to be looked upon as a useful member of society, as one, that is, who is capable of playing his part as a man pro parte virile, thereby acquiring a right to the benefits of social life. Now, to be a useful member of society, one must do 2 things: firstly, what everyone is expected to do everywhere, and, secondly, what one's own particular position in the world demands and requires. But a man soon discovers that everything depends upon his being useful, not in his own opinion, but in the opinion of others, and so he tries his best to make that favorable impression upon the world, to which he attaches such a high value. Hence, this primitive and innate characteristic of human nature, which is called the feeling of honor, or, under another aspect, the feeling of shame verecundia. It is this which brings a blush to his cheeks at the thought of having suddenly to fall in the estimation of others, even when he knows that he is innocent, nay, even if his remissness extends to no absolute obligation, but only to one which he has taken upon himself of his own free will. Conversely, nothing in life gives a man so much courage as the attainment or renewal of the conviction that other people regard him with favor, because it means that everyone joins to give him help and protection, which is an infinitely stronger bulwark against the ills of life than anything he can do himself. The variety of relations in which a man can stand to other people so as to obtain their confidence, that is, their good opinion, gives rise to a distinction between several kinds of honor, resting chiefly on the different bearings that meum may take to whom, or, again, on the performance of various pledges, or finally, on the relation of the sexes. Hence, there are three main kinds of honor, each of which takes various forms: civic honor, official honor, and sexual honor. Civic honor has the widest sphere of all. It consists in the assumption that we shall pay unconditional respect to the rights of others, and, therefore, never use any unjust or unlawful means of getting what we want. It is the condition of all peaceable intercourse between man and man, and it is destroyed by anything that openly and manifestly militates against this peaceable intercourse, anything, accordingly, which entails punishment at the hands of the law, always supposing that the punishment is a just one. The ultimate foundation of honor is the conviction that moral character is unalterable. A single bad action implies that future actions of the same kind will, under similar circumstances, also be bad. This is well expressed by the English use of the word character as meaning credit, reputation, honor. Hence honor, once lost, can never be recovered, unless the loss rested on some mistake, such as may occur if a man is slandered or his actions viewed in a false light. So the law provides remedies against slander, libel, and even insult. For insult, though it amounts to no more than mere abuse, is a kind of summary slander with a suppression of the reasons. Vn had may be well put in the Greek phrase not quoted from any author Greek, est in haloideria diaboli. It is true that if a man abuses another, he is simply showing that he has no real or true causes of complaint against him, as, otherwise, he would bring these forward as the premises, and rely upon his hearers to draw the conclusion themselves, instead of which, he gives the conclusion and leaves out the premises, trusting that people will suppose that he has done so only for the sake of being brief. Civic honor draws its existence and name from the middle classes, but it applies equally to all, not excepting the highest. No man can disregard it, and it is a very serious thing, of which everyone should be careful not to make light. The man who breaks confidence has forever forfeited confidence, whatever he may do, and whoever he may be, and the bitter consequences of the loss of confidence can never be averted. There is a sense in which honor may be said to have a negative character in opposition to the positive character of fame. For honor is not the opinion people have of particular qualities which a man may happen to possess exclusively, it is rather the opinion they have of the qualities which a man may be expected to exhibit, and to which he should not prove false. Honor, therefore, means that a man is not exceptional; fame, that he is. Fame is something which must be won; honor, only something which must not be lost. The absence of fame is obscurity, which is only a negative, but loss of honor is shame, which is a positive quality. This negative character of honor must not be confused with anything passive, for honor is above all things active in its working. It is the only quality which proceeds directly from the man who exhibits it. It is concerned entirely with what he does and leaves undone, and has nothing to do with the actions of others or the obstacles they place in his way. It is something entirely in our own power. Greek, ton e phaimon. This distinction, as we shall see presently, marks off true honor from the sham honor of chivalry. Slander is the only weapon by which honor can be attacked from without, and the only way to repel the attack is to confute the slander with the proper amount of publicity, and a due unmasking of him who utters it. The reason why respect is paid to age is that old people have necessarily shown in the course of their lives whether or not they have been able to maintain their honor unblemished, while that of young people has not been put to the proof, though they are credited the possession of it. For neither length of years, equaled, as it is, and even excelled, in the case of the lower animals, nor, again, experience, which is only a closer knowledge of the world's ways, can be any sufficient reason for the respect which the young are everywhere required to show towards the old, for if it were merely a matter of years, the weakness which attends on age would call rather for consideration than for respect. It is, however, a remarkable fact that white hair always commands reverence, a reverence really innate and instinctive. Wrinkles, a much surer sign of old age, command no reverence at all. You never hear anyone speak of venerable wrinkles, but venerable white hair is a common expression. Honor has only an indirect value. For, as I explained at the beginning of this chapter, what other people think of us, if it affects us at all, can affect us only in so far as it governs their behavior towards us, and only just so long as we live with, or have to do with, them. But it is to society alone that we owe that safety which we in our possessions enjoy in a state of civilization. In all we do we need the help of others, and they, in their turn, must have confidence in us before they can have anything to do with us. Accordingly, their opinion of us is, indirectly, a matter of great importance, though I cannot see how it can have a direct or immediate value. This is an opinion also held by Cicero. I quite agree, he writes, what Chrysippus and Diogenes used to say, that a good reputation is not worth raising a finger to obtain, if it were not that it is so useful. This truth has been insisted upon at great length by Helvetius in his chief work De One Esprit, the conclusion of which is that we love esteem not for its own sake, but solely for the advantages which it brings. And as the means can never be more than the end, that saying, of which so much is made, honor is dearer than life itself, is, as I have remarked, a very exaggerated statement. So much then, for civic honor. Official honor is the general opinion of other people that a man who fills any office really has the necessary qualities for the proper discharge of all the duties which appertain to it. The greater and more important the duties a man has to discharge in the state, and the higher and more influential the office which he fills, the stronger must be the opinion which people have of the moral and intellectual qualities which render him fit for his post. Therefore, the higher his position, the greater must be the degree of honor paid to him, expressed, as it is, in titles, orders and the generally subservient behavior of others towards him. As a rule, a man's official rank implies the particular degree of honor which ought to be paid to him, however much this degree may be modified by the capacity of the masses to form any notion of its importance. Still, as a matter of fact, greater honor is paid to a man who fulfills special duties than to the common citizen, whose honor mainly consists in keeping clear of dishonor. Official honor demands, further, that the man who occupies an office must maintain respect for it, for the sake both of his colleagues and of those who will come after him. This respect an official can maintain by a proper observance of his duties, and by repelling any attack that may be made upon the office itself or upon its occupant. He must not, for instance, pass over unheeded any statement to the effect that the duties of the office are not properly discharged, or that the office itself does not conduce to the public welfare. He must prove the unwarrantable nature of such attacks by enforcing the legal penalty for them. Subordinate to the honor of official personages comes that of those who serve the state in any other capacity, as doctors, lawyers, teachers, anyone, in short, who, by graduating in any subject, or by any other public declaration that he is qualified to exercise some special skill, claims to practice it, in a word, the honor of all those who take any public pledges whatever. Under this head comes military honor, in the true sense of the word, the opinion that people who have bound themselves to defend their country really possess the requisite qualities which will enable them to do, especially courage, personal bravery, and strength, and that they perfectly ready to defend their country to the death, and never and under any circumstances desert the flag to which they have once sworn allegiance. I have here taken official honor in a wider sense than that in which it is generally used, namely, the respect due by citizens to an office itself. In treating of sexual honor and the principles on which it rests, a little more attention and analysis are necessary, and what I shall say will support my contention that all honor really rests upon a utilitarian basis. There are two natural divisions of the subject: the honor of women and the honor of men, in either side issuing in a well-understood esprit de corps. The former is by far the more important of the five, because the most essential feature in woman's life is her relation to man. Female honor is the general opinion in regard to a girl that she is pure, and in regard to a wife that she is faithful. The importance of this opinion rests upon the following considerations. Women depend upon men in all the relations of life, men upon women, it might be said, in one only. So an arrangement is made for mutual interdependence, man undertaking responsibility for all women's needs and also for the children that spring from their union, an arrangement on which is based the welfare of the whole female race. To carry out this plan, women have to band together with a show of esprit de corps, and present one undivided front to their common enemy, man, who possesses all the good things of the earth, in virtue of his superior physical and intellectual power, in order to lay siege to and conquer him, and so get possession of him and a share of those good things. To this end the honor of all women depends upon the enforcement of the rule that no woman should give herself to a man except in marriage, in order that every man may be forced, as it were, to surrender and ally himself with a woman. By this arrangement provision is made for the whole of the female race. This is a result, however, which can be obtained only by a strict observance of the rule, and, accordingly, women everywhere show true esprit de corps in carefully insisting upon its maintenance. Any girl who commits a breach of the rule betrays the whole female race, because its welfare would be destroyed if every woman were to do likewise, so she is cast out with shame as one who has lost her honor. No woman will have anything more to do with her, she is avoided like the plague. The same doom is awarded to a woman who breaks the marriage tie, for in so doing she is false to the terms upon which the man capitulated, and as her conduct is such as to frighten other men from making a similar surrender, it imperils the welfare of all her sisters. Nay, more, this deception and coarse breach of troth is a crime punishable by the loss, not only of personal, but also of civic honor. This is why we minimize the shame of a girl, but not of a wife, because, in the former case, marriage can restore honor, while in the latter, no atonement can be made for the breach of contract. Once this esprit de corps is acknowledged to be the foundation of female honor, and is seen to be a wholesome, nay, a necessary arrangement, as at bottom a matter of prudence and interest, its extreme importance for the welfare of women will be recognized. But it does not possess anything more than a relative value. It is no absolute end, lying beyond all other aims of existence and valued above life itself. In this view, there will be nothing to applaud in the forced and extravagant conduct of a Lucretia or a Virginia's conduct, which can easily degenerate into tragic farce, and produce a terrible feeling of revulsion. The conclusion of Emilia Galati, for instance, makes one leave the theatre completely ill at ease, and, on the other hand, all the rules of female honor cannot prevent a certain sympathy with Clara and Egmont. To carry this principle of female honor too far is to forget the end in thinking of the means, and this is just what people often do, for such exaggeration suggests that the value of sexual honor is absolute, while the truth is that it is more relative than any other kind. One might go so far as to say that its value is purely conventional, when one sees from Thomas's how in all ages and countries, up to the time of the Reformation, irregularities were permitted and recognized by law, with no derogation to female honor, not to speak of the temple of Mylitta at Babylon. There are also of course certain circumstances in civil life which make external forms of marriage impossible, especially in Catholic countries, where there is no such thing as divorce. Ruling princes everywhere would, in my opinion, do much better, from a moral point of view, to dispense with forms altogether rather than contract a morganatic marriage, the descendants of which might raise claims to the throne if the legitimate stock happened to die out, so that there is a possibility, though, perhaps, a remote one, that a morganatic marriage might produce a civil war. And, besides, such a marriage, concluded in defiance of all outward ceremony, is a concession made to women and priests, two classes of persons to whom one should be most careful to give as little tether as possible. It is further to be remarked that every man in a country can marry the woman of his choice, except one poor individual, namely, the prince. His hand belongs to his country, and can be given in marriage only for reasons of state, that is, for the of the country. Still, for all that, he is a man, and, as a man, he likes to follow whither his heart leads. It is an unjust, ungrateful, and priggish thing to forbid, or to desire to forbid, a prince from following his inclinations in this matter, of course, as long as the lady has no influence upon the government of the country. From her point of view she occupies an exceptional position, and does not come under the ordinary rules of sexual honor, for she has merely given herself to a man who loves her, and whom she loves but cannot marry. And in general, the fact that the principle of female honor has no origin in nature, is shown by the many sacrifices which have been offered to it, the murder of children and the mother's suicide. No doubt a girl who contravenes the code commits a breach of faith against her whole sex, but this faith is one which is only secretly taken for granted, and not sworn to. And since, in most cases, her own prospects suffer most immediately, her folly is infinitely greater than her crime. The corresponding virtue in men is of the one I have been discussing. It is their esprit de corps, which demands that, once a man has made that surrender of himself in marriage which is so advantageous to his conqueror, he shall take care that the terms of the treaty are maintained, both in order that the agreement itself may lose none of its force by the permission of any laxity in its observance, and that men, having given up everything, may, at least, be assured of their bargain, namely, exclusive possession. Accordingly, it is part of a man's honor to resent a breach of the marriage tie on the part of his wife, and to punish it, at the very least by separating from her. If he condones the offense, his fellow men cry shame upon him, but the shame in this case is not nearly so foul as that of the woman who has lost her honor. The stain is by no means of so deep a die levioris noti macula, because a man's relation to woman is subordinate to many other and more important affairs in his life. The two great dramatic poets of modern times have each taken man's honor as the theme of two plays, Shakespeare in Othello and The Winter's Tale, and Calderon in I Medico de su Honra, the physician of his honor, and A Secreto Aggravio Venganza, for secret insult vengeance. It should be said, however, that honor demands the punishment of the wife only. To punish her paramour too, is a work of supererogation. This confirms the view I have taken, that a man's honor originates in esprit de corps. The kind of honor which I have been discussing hitherto has always existed in its various forms and principles amongst all nations and at all times, although the history of female honor shows that its principles have undergone certain local modifications at different periods. But there is another species of honor which differs from this entirely, a species of honor of which the Greeks and Romans had no conception, and up to this day it is unknown amongst Chinese, Hindus, or Mohammedans. It is a kind of honor which arose only in the Middle Age, and is indigenous only to Christian Europe, nay, only to an extremely small portion of the population, that is to say, the higher classes of society and those who ape them. It is knightly honor, or point d'honneur. Its principles are quite different from those which underlie the kind of honor I have been treating until now, and in some respects are even opposed to them. The sort I am referring to produces the cavalier, while the other kind creates the man of honor. As this is so, I shall proceed to give an explanation of its principles, as a kind of code or mirror of knightly courtesy. 1. To begin with, honor of this sort consists, not in other people's opinion of what we are worth, but wholly and entirely in whether they express it or not, no matter whether they really have any opinion at all, let alone whether they know of reasons for having one. Other people may entertain the worst opinion of us in consequence of what we do, and may despise us as much as they like. So long as no one dares to give expression to his opinion, our honor remains untarnished. So if our actions and qualities compel the highest respect from other people, and they have no option but to give this respect, as soon as anyone, no matter how wicked or foolish he may be, utters something depreciatory of us, our honor is offended, nay, gone forever, unless we can manage to restore it. A superfluous proof of what I say, namely, that knightly honor depends, not upon what people think, but upon what they say, is furnished by the fact that insults can be withdrawn, or, if necessary, form the subject of an apology, which makes them as though they had never been uttered. 6. Whether the opinion which underlays the expression has also been rectified, and why the expression should ever have been used, are questions which are perfectly unimportant, so long as the statement is withdrawn, all is well. The truth is that conduct of this kind aims, not at earning respect, but at extorting it. 2. In the second place, this sort of honor rests, not on what a man does, but on what he suffers, the obstacles he encounters, differing from the honor which prevails in all else, in consisting, not in what he says or does himself, but in what another man says or does. His honor is thus at the mercy of every man who can talk it away on the tip of his tongue, and if he attacks it, in a moment it is gone forever, unless the man who is attacked manages to wrest it back again by a process which I shall mention presently, a process which involves danger to his life, health, freedom, property, and peace of mind. A man's whole conduct may be in accordance with the most righteous and noble principles, his spirit may be the purest that ever breathed, his intellect of the very highest order, and yet his honor may disappear the moment that anyone is pleased to insult him, anyone at all who has not offended against this code of honor himself, let him be the most worthless rascal or the most stupid beast, an idler, gambler, debtor, a man, in short, of no account at all. It is usually this sort of fellow who likes to insult people, for, as Seneca rightly remarks, ut quisque contemptissimus et ludibrio est, ita salutissimi est, the more contemptible and ridiculous a man is, the readier he is with his tongue. His insults are most likely to be directed against the very kind of man I have, because people of different tastes can never be friends, and the sight of preeminent merit is apt to raise the secret ire of a ne'er-do-well. Vivihat Goethe says in the Westest Liker Divan is quite true, that it is useless to complain against your enemies, for they can never become your friends, if your whole being is a standing reproach to them. Was klagst du Überfeinde? Salten solch je worden Freundedienen das Wesen, wie du bist, 1 still in ein Wiger Vorwurf ist? It is obvious that people of this worthless description have good cause to be thankful to the principle of honor, because it puts them on a level with people who in every other respect stand far above them. If a fellow likes to insult anyone, attribute to him, for example, some bad quality, this is taken prima facie as a well-founded opinion, true in fact, a decree, as it were, with all the force of law. Nay, if it is not at once wiped out in it is a judgment which holds good and valid to all time. In other words, the man who is insulted remains in the eyes of all honorable people what the man who uttered the insult, even though he were the greatest wretch on earth, was pleased to call him, for he has put up with the insult, the technical term, I believe. Accordingly, all honorable people will have nothing more to do with him, and treat him like a leper, and, it may be, refuse to go into any company where he may be found, and so on. This wise proceeding may, I think, be traced back to the fact that in the Middle Age, up to the 15th century, it was not the accuser in any criminal process who had to prove the guilt of the accused, but the accused who had to prove his innocence. This he could do by swearing he was not guilty, and his backers consacramentals had to come and swear that in their opinion he was incapable of perjury. If he could find no one to help him in this way, or the accuser took objection to his backers, recourse was had to trial by the judgment of God, which generally meant a duel. For the accused was now in disgrace, and had to clear himself. Here, then, is the origin of the notion of disgrace, and of that whole system which prevails nowadays amongst honorable people, only that the oath is omitted. This is also the explanation of that deep feeling of indignation which honorable people are called upon to show if they are given the lie. It is a reproach which they say must be wiped out in blood. It seldom comes to this pass, however, though lies are of common occurrence, but in England, more than elsewhere, it is a superstition which has taken very deep root. As a matter of order, a man who threatens to kill another for telling a lie should never have told one himself. The fact is, that the criminal trial of the Middle Age also admitted of a shorter form. In reply to the charge, the accused answered, "That is a lie," whereupon it was left to be decided by the judgment of God. Hence, the Code of Knightly Honor prescribes that, when the lie is given, an appeal to arms follows as a matter of course. So much, then, for the theory of insult. But there is something even worse than insult, something so dreadful that I must pardon of all honorable people for so much as mentioning it in this Code of Knightly Honor, for I know they will shiver, and their hair will stand on end, at the very thought of it. The summum malum, the greatest evil on earth, worse than death and damnation. A man may give another horrible dicta. A slap or a blow. This is such an awful thing, and so utterly fatal to all honor, that, while any other species of insult may be healed by this, can be cured only by the coup de grace. 3. In the third place, this kind of honor has absolutely nothing to do with what a man may be in and for himself, or, again, with the question whether his moral character can ever become better or worse, and all such pedantic inquiries. If your honor happens to be attacked, or to all appearances gone, it can very soon be restored in its entirety if you are only quick enough in having recourse to the one universal remedy, a duel. But if the aggressor does not belong to the classes which recognize the code of knightly honor, or has himself once offended against it, there is a safer way of meeting any attack upon your honor, whether it consists in blows, or merely in words. If you are armed, you can strike down your opponent on the spot, or perhaps an hour later. This will restore your honor. But if you wish to avoid such an extreme step, from fear of any unpleasant consequences arising therefrom, or from uncertainty as to whether the aggressor is subject to the laws of knightly honor or not, there is another means of making your position good, namely, the advantage. This consists in returning rudeness ft still greater rudeness, and if insults are no use, you can try a blow, which forms a sort of climax in the redemption of your honor. For instance, a box on the ear may be cured by a blow with a stick, and a blow with a stick by a thrashing with a horsewhip, and, as the approved remedy for this last, some people recommend you to spit at your opponent. If all these means are of no avail, you must not shrink from drawing blood. And the reason for these methods of wiping out insult is, in this code, as follows: 4. To receive an insult is disgraceful, to give one, honorable. Let me take an example. My opponent has truth, right, and reason on his side. Very well. I insult him. Thereupon right and honor leave him and come to me, and, for the time being, he has lost them until he gets them back, not by the exercise of right or reason, but by shooting and sticking me. Accordingly, rudeness is a quality which, in point of honor, is a substitute for any other and outweighs them all. The rudest is always right. 6. More do you want? However stupid, bad, or wicked a man may have been, if he is only rude into the bargain, he condones and legitimizes all his faults. If in any discussion or conversation, another man shows more knowledge, greater love of truth, a sounder judgment, better understanding than we, or generally exhibits intellectual qualities which cast ours into the shade, we can at once annul his superiority in our own shallowness, and in our turn be superior to him, by being insulting and offensive. For rudeness is better than any argument, it totally eclipses intellect. If our opponent does not care for our mode of attack, and will not answer still more rudely, so as to plunge us into the ignoble rivalry of the advantage, we are the victors and honor is on our side. Truth, knowledge, understanding, intellect, wit, must beat a retreat and leave the field to this almighty insolence. Honorable people immediately make a show of mounting their war horse, if anyone utters an opinion adverse to theirs, or shows more intelligence than they can muster, and if in any controversy they are at a loss for a reply, they look about for some weapon of rudeness, which will serve as well and come readier to hand, so they retire masters of the position. It must now be obvious that people are quite right in applauding this principle of honor as having ennobled the tone of society. This principle springs from another, which forms the heart and soul of the entire code. 5. Fifthly, the code implies that the highest court to which a man can appeal in any differences he may have with another on a point of honor is the court of physical force, that is, of brutality. Every piece of rudeness is, strictly speaking, an appeal to brutality, for it is a declaration that intellectual strength and moral insight are incompetent to decide, and that the battle must be fought out by physical force, a struggle which, in the case of man, whom Franklin defines as a tool-making animal, is decided by the weapons peculiar to the species, and the decision is irrevocable. This is the well-known principle of right of might, irony, of course, like the wit of a fool, a parallel phrase. The honor of a knight may be called the glory of might. 6. Lastly, if, as we saw above, civic honor is very scrupulous in the matter of meum and tuum, paying great respect to obligations in a promise once made, the code we are here discussing displays, on the other hand, the noblest liberality. There is only one word which may not be broken, the word of honor upon my honor, as people say, the presumption being, of course, that every other form of promise may be broken. Nay, if the worst comes to the worst, it is easy to break even one's word of honor, and still remain honorable again by adopting that universal remedy, the duel, and fighting with those who maintain that we pledged our word. Further, there is one debt, and one alone, that under no circumstances must be left unpaid, a gambling debt, which has accordingly been called a debt of honor. In all other kinds of debt you may cheat Jews and Christians as much as you like, and your knightly honor remains without a stain. The unprejudiced reader will see at once that such a strange, savage, and ridiculous code of honor as this has no foundation in human nature, nor any warrant in a healthy view of human affairs. The extremely narrow sphere of its operation serves only to intensify the feeling, which is exclusively confined to Europe since the Middle Age, and then only to the upper classes, officers, and soldiers, and people who imitate them. Neither Greeks nor Romans knew anything of this code of honor or of its principles, nor the highly civilized nations of Asia, ancient or modern. Amongst them no other kind of honor is recognized but that which I discussed first, in virtue of which a man is what he shows himself to be by his actions, not what any wagging tongue is pleased to say of him. They thought that what a man said or did might perhaps affect his own honor, but not any other man's. To them, a blow was but a blow, and any horse or donkey could give a harder one a blow which under certain circumstances might make a man angry and demand immediate vengeance, but it had nothing to do with honor. No one kept account of blows or insulting words, or of the satisfaction which was demanded or omitted to be demanded. Yet in personal bravery and contempt of death, the ancients were certainly not inferior to the nations of Christian Europe. The Greeks and Romans were thorough heroes, if you like, but they knew nothing about point d'honneur. If they had any idea of a duel, it was totally unconnected with the life of the nobles, it was merely the exhibition of mercenary gladiators, slaves devoted to slaughter, condemned criminals, who, alternately with wild beasts, were set to butcher one another to make a Roman holiday. When Christianity was introduced, gladiatorial shows were done away with, and their place taken, in Christian times, by the duel, which was a way of settling difficulties by the judgment of God. If the gladiatorial fight was a cruel sacrifice to the prevailing desire for great spectacles, dueling is a cruel sacrifice to existing prejudices, a sacrifice, not of criminals, slaves, and prisoners, but of the noble, and that there are a great many traits in the character of the ancients which show that they were entirely free from these prejudices. When, for instance, Marius was summoned to a duel by a Teutonic chief, he returned answer to the effect that, if the chief were tired of his life, he might go and hang himself. At the same time he offered him a veteran gladiator for a round or two. Plutarch relates in his life of Themistocles that Eurybiades, who was in command of the fleet, once raised his stick to strike him, whereupon Themistocles, instead of drawing his sword, simply said, "Strike, but hear me." How sorry the reader must be, if he is an honorable man, to find that we have no information that the Athenian officers refused in a body to serve any longer under Themistocles, if he acted like that. There is a modern French writer who declares that if anyone considers Demos thence a man of honor, his ignorance will excite a smile of pity, and that Cicero was not a man of honor either. In a certain passage in Plato's Laws the philosopher speaks at length of Greek, Ikea or assault, showing us clearly enough that the ancients had no notion of any feeling of honor in connection with such matters. Socrates' frequent discussions were often followed by his being severely handled, and he bore it all mildly. Once, for instance, when somebody kicked him, the patience which he took the insult surprised one of his friends. "Do you think," said Socrates, "that if an ass happened to kick me, I should resent it?" On another occasion, when he was asked, "Has not that fellow abused and insulted you?" "No," was his answer, what he says is not addressed to me. Stobaeus has preserved a long passage from Musonius, from which we can see how the ancients treated insults. They knew no other form of satisfaction than that which the law provided, and wise people despised even this. If a Greek received a box on the ear, he could get satisfaction by the aid of the law, as is evident from Plato's Gorgias, where Socrates' opinion may be found. The same thing may be seen in the account given by Gellius of one Lucius Veritius, who had the audacity to give some Roman citizens whom he met on the road a box on the ear, without any provocation whatever, but to avoid any ulterior consequences. He told a slave to bring a bag of small money, and in the spot paid the trivial legal penalty to the men whom he had astonished by his conduct. Crates, the celebrated Cynic philosopher, got such a box on the ear from Nicodramus, the musician, that his face swelled up and became black and blue, whereupon he put a label on his forehead, the inscription, Nicodramus facit, which brought much disgrace to the flute player who had committed such a piece of brutality upon the man whom all Athens honored as a household god. And in a letter to Melesippus, Diogenes of Sinope tells us that he got a beating from the drunken sons of the Athenians, but he adds that it was a matter of no importance. And Seneca devotes the last few chapters of his De Constantia to a lengthy discussion on insult contumelia, in order to show that a wise man will take no notice of it. In chapter 14, he says, "Vhat shall a wise man do, if he is given a blow? Vhat Cato did, when someone struck him on the mouth, not fire up or avenge the insult, or even redeem the blow, but simply ignore it." Yes, you say, but these men were philosophers. And you are fools, eh? Precisely. It is clear that the whole code of knightly honor was utterly unknown to the ancients, for the simple reason that they always took a natural and unprejudiced view of human affairs, and did not allow themselves to be influenced by any such vicious and abominable folly. A blow in the face was to them a blow and nothing more, a trivial physical injury, whereas the moderns make a catastrophe out of it, a theme for a tragedy, as, for instance, in the Cid of Corneille, or in a recent German comedy of middle-class life, called The Power of Circumstance, which should have been entitled The Power of Prejudice. If a member of the National Assembly at Paris got a blow on the ear, it would resound from one end of Europe to the other. The examples which I have given of the way in which such an occurrence would have been treated in classic times may not suit the ideas of honorable people, so let me recommend to their notice, as a kind of antidote, the story of Monsieur Desglands in Diderot's masterpiece, Jacques le Fatalist. It is an excellent specimen of modern knightly honor, which, no doubt, they will find enjoyable and edifying. From what I have said, it must be quite evident that the principle of knightly honor has no essential and spontaneous origin in human nature. It is an artificial product, and its source is not hard to find. Its existence obviously dates from the time when people used their fists more than their heads, when priestcraft had enchained the human intellect, the much bepraised Middle Age, with its system of chivalry. That was the time when people let the Almighty not only care for them but judge for them too, when difficult cases were decided by an ordeal, a judgment of God, which, with few exceptions, meant a duel, not only where nobles were concerned, but in the case of ordinary citizens as well. There is a neat illustration of this in Shakespeare's Henry VI. Every judicial sentence was subject to an appeal to arms, a court, as it were, of higher instance, namely, the judgment of God, and this really meant that physical strength and activity, that is, our animal nature, usurped the place of reason on the judgment seat, deciding in matters of right and wrong, not by what a man had done, but by the force with which he was opposed, the same system, in fact, as prevails today under the principles of knightly honor. If any one doubts that such is really the origin of our modern duel, let him read an excellent work by J.B. Millingen, The History of Dueling. Nay, you may still find amongst the supporters of the system, who, by the way, are not usually the most educated or thoughtful of men, some who look upon the result of a duel as really constituting a divine judgment in the matter in dispute, no doubt in consequence of the traditional feeling on the subject. But leaving aside the question of origin, It must now be clear to us that the main tendency of the principle is to use physical menace for the purpose of extorting an appearance of respect which is deemed too difficult or superfluous to acquire in reality, a proceeding which comes to much the same thing as if you were to prove the warmth of your room by holding your hand on the thermometer and so make it rise. In fact, the kernel of the matter is this: whereas civic honor aims at peaceable intercourse, and consists in the opinion of other people that we deserve full confidence, because we pay unconditional respect to their rights, knightly honor, on the other hand, lays down that we are to be feared, as being determined at all costs to maintain our own. As not much reliance can be placed upon human integrity, the principle that it is more essential to arouse fear than to invite confidence would not, perhaps, be a false one, if we were living in a state of nature, where every man would have to protect himself and directly maintain his own rights. But in civilized life, where the state undertakes the protection of our person and property, the principle is no longer applicable. It stands, like the castles and watchtowers of the age when might was right, a useless and forlorn object, amidst well-tilled fields and frequented roads, or even railways. Accordingly, the application of knightly honor, which still recognizes this principle, is confined to those small cases of personal assault which meet with but slight punishment at the hands of the law, or even none at all, for to minimize mere trivial wrongs, committed sometimes only in jest. The consequence of this limited application of the principle is that it has forced itself into an exaggerated respect for the value of the person, a respect utterly alien to the nature, constitution, or destiny of man, which it has elated into a species of sanctity, and as it considers that the state has imposed a very insufficient penalty on the commission of such trivial injuries, it takes upon itself to punish them by attacking the aggressor in life or limb. The whole thing manifestly rests upon an excessive degree of arrogant pride, which, completely forgetting what man really is, claims that he shall be absolutely free from all attack or even censure. Those who determine to carry out this principle by main force, and announce, as their rule of action, "Whoever insults or strikes me shall die," ought for their pains to be banished the country. As a palliative to this rash arrogance, people are in the habit of giving way everything. If two intrepid persons meet, and neither will give way, the slightest difference may cause a shower of abuse, then fisticuffs, and, finally, a fatal blow, so that it would really be a more decorous proceeding to omit the intermediate steps and appeal to arms at once. An appeal to arms has its own special formalities, and these have developed into a rigid and precise system of laws and regulations. Together forming the most solemn farce there is a regular temple of honor dedicated to folly. For if two intrepid persons dispute over some trivial matter, more important affairs are dealt with by law, one of them, the cleverer of the two, will of course yield, and they will agree to differ. That this is so is proved by the fact that common people, or, rather, the numerous classes of the community who do not acknowledge the principle of knightly honor, let any dispute run its natural course. Amongst these classes homicide is 100-fold rarer than amongst those, and they amount, perhaps, in all, to hardly 1 in 1,000, who pay homage to the principle, and even blows are of no very frequent occurrence. Then it has been said that the manners and tone of good society are ultimately based upon this principle of honor, which, with its system of duels, is made out to be a bulwark against the assaults of savagery and rudeness. But Athens, Corinth, and Rome could assuredly boast of excellent society, and manners and tone of a high order, without any support from the bogey of knightly honor. It is true that women did not occupy that prominent place in ancient society which they hold now, when conversation has taken on a frivolous and trifling character, to the exclusion of that weighty discourse which distinguished the ancients. This change has certainly contributed a great deal to bring about the tendency, which is observable in good society nowadays, to prefer personal courage to the possession of any other quality. The fact is that personal courage is really a very subordinate virtue, merely the distinguishing mark of a subaltern, a virtue, indeed, in which we are surpassed by the lower animals, or else you would not hear people say, "as brave as a lion." Far from the pillar of society, knightly honor affords a sure asylum, in general for dishonesty and wickedness, and also for small incivilities, want of consideration and unmannerliness. Rude behavior is often passed over in silence because no one cares to risk his neck in correcting it. After what I have said, it will not appear strange that the dueling system is carried to the highest pitch of sanguinary zeal precisely in that nation whose political and financial records show that they are not too honorable. That nation is like in its private and domestic life, is a question which may be best put to those who are experienced in the matter. Their urbanity and social culture have long been conspicuous by their absence. There is no truth, then, in such pretexts. It can be urged with more justice that as, when you snarl at a dog, he snarls in return, and when you pet him, he fawns, so it lies in the nature of men to return hostility by hostility, and to be embittered and irritated at any signs of depreciatory treatment or hatred, and, as Cicero says, there is something so penetrating in the shaft of envy that even men of wisdom and worth find its wound a painful one, and nowhere in the world, except, perhaps, in a few religious sects, is an insult or a blow taken with equanimity. And yet a natural view of either would in no case demand anything more than a requital proportionate to the offense, and would never go to the length of assigning death as the proper penalty for anyone who accuses another of lying or stupidity or cowardice. The old German theory of blood for a blow is a revolting superstition of the age of chivalry. And in any case the return or requital of an insult is dictated by anger, and not by any such obligation of honor and duty as the advocates of chivalry seek to attach to it. The fact is that, the greater the truth, the greater the slander, and it is clear that the slightest hint of some real delinquency will give much greater offense than a most terrible accusation which is perfectly baseless, so that a man who is quite sure that he has done nothing to deserve a reproach may treat it with contempt, and will be safe in doing so. The theory of honor demands that he shall show a susceptibility which he does not possess, and take vengeance for insults which he cannot feel. A man must himself have but a poor opinion of his own worth who hastens to prevent the utterance of an unfavorable opinion by giving his enemy a black eye. True appreciation of his own value will make a man really indifferent to insult, but if he cannot help resenting it, a little shrewdness and culture will enable him to save appearances and dissemble his anger. If he could only get rid of this superstition about honor, the idea, I mean, that it disappears when you are insulted, and can be restored by returning the insult, if we could only stop people from thinking that wrong, brutality and insolence can be legalized by expressing readiness to give satisfaction, that is, to fight in defense of it, we should all soon come to the general opinion that insult and depreciation are like a battle in which the loser wins, and that, as Vincenzo Monti says, abuse resembles a church procession, because it always returns to the point from which it set out. If we could only get people to look upon insult in this light, we should no longer have to say something rude in order to prove that we are in the right. Now, unfortunately, if we want to take a serious view of any question, we have first of all to consider whether it will not give offense in some way or other to the dullard, who generally shows alarm and resentment at the merest sign of intelligence, and it may easily happen that the head which contains the intelligent view has to be pitted against the noodle which is empty of everything but narrowness and stupidity. If all this were done away with, intellectual superiority could take the leading place in society, which is its due a place now occupied, though people do not like to confess it, by excellence of physique, mere fighting pluck, in fact, and the natural effect of such a change would be that the best kind of people would have one reason the less for withdrawing from society. This would pave the way for the introduction of real courtesy and genuinely good society, such as undoubtedly existed in Athens, Corinth, and Rome. If anyone wants to see a good example of what I mean, I should like him to read Xenophon's Banquet. The last argument in defense of knightly honor no doubt is, that, but for its existence, the world awful thought would be a regular bear garden. To which I may briefly reply that 999 people out of 1,000 who do not recognize the code, have often given and received a blow without any fatal consequences, whereas amongst the adherents of the code a blow usually means death to one of the parties. But let me examine this argument more closely. I have often tried to find some tenable, or at any rate, plausible basis other than a merely conventional one, some positive reasons, that is to say, for the rooted conviction which a portion of mankind entertains, that a blow is a very dreadful thing, but I have looked for it in vain, either in the animal or in the rational side of human nature. A blow is, and always will be, a trivial physical injury which one man can do to another, proving, thereby, nothing more than his superiority in strength or skill, or that his enemy was off his guard. Analysis will carry us no further. The same knight who regards a blow from the human hand as the greatest of evils, if he gets a 10 times harder blow from his horse, will give you the assurance, as he limps away in suppressed pain, that it is a matter of no consequence whatever. So I have come to think that it is the human hand which is at the bottom of the mischief. And yet in a battle the knight may get cuts and thrusts from the same hand, and still assure you that his wounds are not worth mentioning. Now, I hear that a blow from the flat of a sword is not by any means so bad as a blow from a stick, and that, a short time ago, cadets were liable to be punished by the one but not the other, and that the very greatest honor of all is the accolade. This is all the psychological or moral basis that I can find, and so there is nothing left me but to pronounce the whole thing an antiquated superstition that has taken deep root, and one more of the many examples which show the force of tradition. My view is confirmed by the well-known fact that in China a beating with a bamboo is a very frequent punishment for the common people, and even for officials of every class, which shows that human nature, even in a highly civilized state, does not run in the same groove here and in China. On the contrary, an unprejudiced view of human nature shows that it is just as natural for a man to beat as it is for savage animals to bite and rend in pieces, or for horned beasts to butt or push. Man may be said to be the animal that beats. Hence it is revolting to our sense of the fitness of things to hear, as we sometimes do, that one man bitten another. On the other hand, it is a natural and everyday occurrence for him to get blows or give them. It is intelligible enough that, as we become educated, we are glad to dispense blows by a system of mutual restraint. But it is a cruel thing to compel a nation or a single class to regard a blow as an awful misfortune which must have death and murder for its consequences. There are too many genuine evils in the world to allow of our increasing them by imaginary misfortunes, which brings real ones in their train, and yet this is the precise effect of the superstition, which thus proves itself at once stupid and malign. It does not seem to me wise of governments and legislative bodies to promote any such folly by attempting to do away with flogging as a punishment in civil or military life. Their idea is that they are acting in the interests of humanity, but, in point of fact, they are doing just the opposite, for the abolition of flogging will serve only to strengthen this inhuman and abominable superstition, to which so many sacrifices have already been made. For all offenses, except the worst, a beating is the obvious, and therefore the natural penalty, and a man who will not listen to reason will yield to blows. It seems to me right and proper to administer corporal punishment to the man who possesses nothing and therefore cannot be fined, or cannot be put in prison because his master's interests would suffer by the loss of his service. There are really no arguments against it, only mere talk about the dignity of man, talk which proceeds, not from any clear notions on the but from the pernicious superstition I have been describing. That it is a superstition which lies at the bottom of the whole business is proved by an almost laughable example. Not long ago, in the military discipline of many countries, the cat was replaced by the stick. In either case the object was to produce physical pain, but the latter method involved no disgrace, and was not derogatory to honor. By promoting this superstition, the state is playing into the hands of the principle of knightly honor, and therefore of the duel, while at the same time it is trying, or at any rate it pretends it is trying, to abolish the duel by legislative enactment. As a natural consequence we find that this fragment of the theory that might is right, which has come down to us from the most savage days of the Middle Age, has still in this 19th century a good deal of life left in it, more shame to us. It is high time for the principle to be driven out bag and baggage. Nowadays no one is allowed to set dogs or cocks to fight each other, at any rate, in England it is a penal offence, but men are plunged into deadly strife, against their will, by the operation of this ridiculous, superstitious, and absurd principle, which imposes upon us the obligation, as its narrow-minded supporters and advocates declare, of fighting with one another like gladiators, for any little trifle. Let me recommend our purists to adopt the expression baiting instead of duel, which probably comes to us, not from the Latin duellum, but from the Spanish duello, meaning suffering, nuisance, annoyance. In any case, we may well laugh at the pedantic excess to which this foolish system has been carried. It is really revolting that this principle, with its absurd code, can form a power within the state imperium in imperio, a power too easily put in motion, which, recognizing no right but might, tyrannizes over the classes which come within its range, by keeping up a sort of inquisition, before which any one may be hailed on the most flimsy pretext, and there and then be tried on an issue of life and death between himself and his opponent. This is the lurking place from which every rascal, if he only belongs to the classes in question, may menace and even exterminate the noblest and best of men, who, as such, must of course be an object of hatred to him. Our system of justice and police protection has made it impossible in these days for any scoundrel in the street to attack us with your money or your life. An end should be put to the burden which weighs upon the higher classes, the burden, I mean, of having to be ready every moment to expose life and limb to the mercy of anyone who takes it into his rascally head to be coarse, rude, foolish, or malicious. It is perfectly atrocious that a pair of silly, passionate boys should be wounded, maimed, or even killed, simply because they have had a few words. The strength of this tyrannical power within the state, and the force of the superstition, may be measured by the fact that people who are prevented from restoring their knightly honor by the superior or inferior rank of their aggressor, or anything else that puts the persons on a different level, often come to a tragic comic end by committing suicide in sheer despair. You may generally know a thing to be false and ridiculous by finding that, if it is carried to its logical conclusion, it results in a contradiction, and here, too, we have a very glaring absurdity. For an officer is forbidden to take part in a duel, but if he is challenged and declines to come out, he is punished by being dismissed the service. As I am on the matter, let me be more frank still. The important distinction, which is often insisted upon, between killing your enemy in a fair fight with equal weapons, and lying in ambush for him, is entirely a corollary of